Hello there, welcome to Shattered Lives. My name is Paul Healy. I'm usually joined by Michael O'Toole, but he's on the road today, and he sends his apologies that you don't get to listen to him this week. However, this is the third week of the trial of Richard Satchwell, who's accused of the murder of his wife Tina at their home in Youghal in March of 2017. He has pleaded not guilty, and this is, as I say, the third week of the trial. So both myself and Michael have been in court this week. Michael was there on Wednesday while I was covering another case, and I was there Monday, Tuesday and today, and matters will not resume in this trial until next Monday because of an issue that has come up in the interim. So I'm going to go backwards to go forwards because you probably want the most recent information first. So I'm going to talk about today what we heard in court, and then I'm going to go back and talk about some of the other evidence we've heard over the course of this week. Because this is a court case, I can only tell you what is said in court, so it's not for me to give my opinion or to go into any detail that is not heard by the jury of 7 women and 5 men. So as I said, just to recap very quickly, Richard Satchwell, he's 58 years of age, and he is from Youghal. He lived in Grattan Street in Youghal with his wife Tina, and he has pleaded not guilty to the charge of murder. This trial has already heard in great detail how Miss Satchwell's remains were recovered from under the staircase of the home in Grattan Street by Gardaí in October of 2023. And we're at the stage of the trial now where we are getting into the evidence of Richard Satchwell's second arrest, so his rearrest. So last week you may recall that there was a lot of evidence about the first arrest of Mr. Satchwell on the 11th of October 2023 when Gardaí executed that warrant on the house in Grattan Street. We then heard a lot of evidence from witnesses in relation to the actual search, and we started to get into evidence in relation to the finding of the body. So I'm going to come to that, but we also then got into a very lengthy series of interviews, 4 interviews in total with Mr. Satchwell conducted by Gardaí upon his rearrest in Youghal on the 12th of October 2023. And it's in this rearrest that the state alleges, we've already heard at the opening of this case from Geraldine Small, that Mr. Satchwell changed his narrative and began to tell a story that he hadn't told the media and Gardaí in the 6 years before when he said that his wife was missing. The trial today was basically in the start of this morning dealing with the end of the 4th interview conducted with Mr. Satchwell over the course of his rearrest. Throughout this, he is primarily being interviewed by a Detective Sergeant Dave Noonan, and Dave Noonan was going through the evidence with Mr. Satchwell and going through what he had told them over the course of the last 4 interviews. So Detective Sergeant Noonan was asking him to look at photographs, and the first photograph that was shown in court today was a photograph of Tina Satchwell sitting on the couch in the living room of the home she shared with Richard in Grattan Street in December of 2016. So just before this, actually, I should mention Mr. Satchwell was asked about photographs, that he was going to be shown photographs, and he immediately protested about having to be shown photographs of his wife's body. He thought he was going to be shown photographs of his wife's body, and he said that he didn't want to look at her. The quote is, "I want to remember Tina the way she was, not the way that I made her." But he was informed that the photos were not of the body, that they were photographs from inside the home, and he was going to be asked about different changes to the furniture and the layout of the home over the years when they were made, and about the state of the home. And he was shown in this image, as I said, of Tina sitting on the couch, and he was asked about an extra couch, which he said that he didn't remember being there at the time. And he was asked about this couch he had mentioned he had gotten rid of. We had heard evidence that he had placed his wife's body on the couch after she had died in his arms, and he was being asked which couch was that. Was it the couch that he got rid of? He said that it wasn't, and that the couch in question was brought upstairs at a later point. So Detective Sergeant Noonan said that on the basis of the photos that they were looking at, that he thought that the house was quite clean, and he asked Mr. Satchwell, do you accept that? And Mr. Satchwell said, I have to admit, I like the way you're using my own photos on me. He did agree that the house was clean, and he was asked who was the person that primarily cleaned the house, and Mr. Satchwell said, I'd be the chief cleaner. But he said he didn't want to paint his wife out as being lazy, that she would clean also. He was shown a photograph from the 17th of June 2017, which was actually taken by Gardaí during the first search of his home all the way back in June of that year. The photo shows the stairs, the red brick wall where the body was ultimately found in 2023, and he was asked about the layout of the furniture and was it like that in March of 2017. He said that it wasn't, and the furniture had been moved around. He was also asked about the layout of other rooms and about a tear in one of the couches, and he cited that as being the reason why he got rid of it. He was further asked about glass in a particular door, so by a back door that's just next to the stairs, and he was asked had he ever replaced this glass. Now, Mr. Satchwell became a bit irritated about this, and his solicitor said that he had answered this question twice already. And Mr. Satchwell said, this is the third time that I've answered this, but he said that he had not replaced the glass, and he said, maybe you've gotten cotton wool in your ears. I have never replaced the glass in that door. 3 times, 4 now actually, I've told you that. I think you've got the response that you wanted. And Sergeant Noonan asked him, well, what is that? And he said, me getting smart. He was further shown a photograph of the bathroom and was asked about renovations to the bath and replacing the bath, which he said he did in subsequent years, but he couldn't give an exact date on that. In relation to moving the furniture in general, he's being asked about that, and he said, I tried for my own brain to get rid of the memories. I was trying to find myself again. I have said numerous times that I had to rediscover myself after Tina died, and I did, he said. So another photograph was shown of the wall by the stairs, and Mr. Satchwell was being asked about where he had previously told Gardaí in his account of his encounter with his wife on the 20th of March, and I will come back to this when I'm talking about the evidence from earlier in the week, he spoke about his wife using a chisel and that she was breaking up plasterboard in the living area around the stairs when this confrontation, he said, happened, and she ultimately died. And he was being asked to point out in this photograph where the markings were that were left by his wife, because he had asked Gardaí to go and look for them. And Detective Noonan was effectively telling him that these markings could not be seen via this photo, and he was asking the accused to point out these markings. And Mr. Satchwell said that his wife was not crouching down making these marks, that she was possibly leaning over, bending down and making these marks, and that where the detectives had taken photographs and where they were looking, those marks were not actually visible in that photograph. Detective Sergeant Noonan put it to the accused that he was trying to protect himself at this point, and that they have evidence that completely destroys his story, describing again the wall of truth on one side and what Mr. Satchwell was saying. He was alleging to, this is Detective Sergeant Noonan, he was alleging to Mr. Satchwell that he was changing his story. But he said, I don't need your story because it's clear again, and the second story that you came in with here is starting to come apart. And he said it's already come apart in previous interviews. Mr. Satchwell was also shown another photograph of the stairs, and he was asked to point out where he was standing when he said this confrontation happened between him and his wife. And I will come back to this, but in an earlier part of the interview earlier in the week, when Mr. Satchwell started to make, I suppose, admissions about what he said happened and how his wife died, he said that she flew at him with the chisel, and he's being asked about this again in this portion of the interview, and Detective Sergeant Noonan said, she flies at you. In every other interview you told us how violent she was, that she could punch you, and yet you did nothing. And he was asking, how did you just fall back? He was putting it to him that all of a sudden you're falling over, and can you see how that sounds? And he was putting it to him that can you see how that sounds? So he was asking him about that narrative that he was giving. And Mr. Satchwell said, I can see it is your job to tear it apart, to bury me. Now, Detective Sergeant Noonan said he's not trying to bury him. He's just saying that what Mr. Satchwell was now saying does not match up with the evidence that has been acquired by Gardaí investigating this case. He said to Mr. Satchwell, there are so many things that do not add up, and it's very important that you know these things. That was kind of the end of that portion of the interview that was played before the jury. And as I said, it was the fourth of 4 interviews that we have seen over the course of this week. And I'm going to summarise some of what we heard earlier in the week. Of course, if you've been following the headlines, you would have seen an awful lot of it. But it was where Mr. Satchwell was going into detail for the first time ever in the 6 years, this allegation that his wife came at him with a chisel on the morning of the 20th of March 2023, and that she got on top of him, that he tried to protect himself, and that he put the robe of her dressing gown up against her neck, and that she died basically on top of him. Then he spoke about the process of how he ultimately buried her remains. But I'm going to come back to that in a bit more detail because I'm talking to you about what we heard today first. So a number of different witnesses we saw today over the course of the morning and into the afternoon, starting with a number of witnesses from Forensic Science Ireland. And Kristen O'Connor, for example, told the court about hairbrushes that she examined to get a DNA swab and to confirm whether it matched Tina Satchwell's profile, and also about suitcases. If you may recall that Richard Satchwell at one point handed suitcases into Gardaí, is claiming they may well be the suitcases that his wife had made off with. And we heard that there was no DNA sample of Mr. Satchwell or Tina Satchwell on these particular suitcases. We also heard briefly from a Dr. Lee of Forensic Science Ireland, who examined the remains and determined that they were likely those of Tina Satchwell based off the biological match to that of her mother, Mary Collins. Amanda Lennon of Forensic Science Ireland, she briefly looked at the dressing gown and the belt of the dressing gown, but she could not examine them, she said. And she also briefly looked at glass particles. But there was another witness who looked in detail at these glass particles that we heard were recovered from the scalp and the torso of Tina Satchwell's body. So Brian Gorey of Forensic Science Ireland, he showed the court ultimately some samples of the glass, which he said were large shards of glass. There were 15 fragments in total, and the 13 of them had a coating on them which indicated that they could have come from an easily breakable glass, as in glass that shatters easily if you break it, from a glass table, exterior windows, perhaps a door in a home, he said. And that it was likely, given the size of the fragments, that they were transferred to the remains shortly before they were buried. Something that you don't see every day, but Mr. Brendan Gretton, who was defending Richard Satchwell, asked to look at the glass fragments, and we saw him putting on latex gloves and ultimately holding the bag. Of course, later on, they were actually put out on a tray and shown to the jury, and photographs of them were also shown to the jury. This happens sometimes in a trial, but there were some also in the afternoon then some witness statements that were read out, and that means that the witness doesn't actually need to be physically present, but their statement is read out on agreement from both parties. And one particular witness that we heard from today in her witness statement was that of Sarah Dobson. And Sarah Dobson is another individual who says that she met Richard Satchwell at a car boot sale after his wife had, as he had put it at that point in time, gone missing. And in her statement, she said that she could remember the Monday of the May bank holiday weekend in 2017. So remember that Richard had reported his wife missing in March of 2017. She died in March 2017. And in this May bank holiday, this witness said that she spoke to Richard about Tina, and that he told me she was very ill, that she was in hospital for weeks, told me she'd lost about 4 stone in weight. He told me she was in England with her sister until he sorted out the walls of the house. He didn't say anything about what hospital, but he told me it was between 80,000 and 100,000 euro to fix the house so that she could come home. she said that Richard Satchwell was selling off a lot of Tina's stuff and that he was only getting 6 hours a night of sleep. She said, I told him Tina would kill him when she found out that he was selling her stuff. I told Richard to pass on my wishes to Tina, and he told me he was speaking to her later that night. She also spoke of the dog Ruby, who was with Richard at the time, and she said that the dog was cowering from him and appeared to be in an agitated state. We briefly then heard from a number of witnesses in relation to the medical care of Mr. Satchwell in 2017, but really the main witness it was the general practitioner in Fermoy who actually saw Richard Satchwell and Tina Satchwell for many, many years, and that was Dr. Patrick Burke, and he was based in the Medina Medical Centre in Fermoy. And he told the court that he had seen Richard and Tina Satchwell since 1999. I saw them frequently, he said. They always came together in pairs, so they came together all the time, he said, bar maybe the odd occasion. He described Tina as very friendly, very open, a great communicator, and he was asked about whether she had any psychological issues, and he said not that he could see that maybe she suffered from anxiety, but never anything sufficient to warrant intervention. There was some issue over this doctor's encounter with Richard Satchwell on the 24th of March 2017. We had heard an allegation by Mr. Satchwell that the doctor had said to him that he was right not to report his wife missing for 4 days. The doctor disputes this account and said that he would never have said that and that he did tell Mr. Satchwell to report it to the Gardaí. Now, he accepts having looked at the statement that he made and having looked at his own records that this encounter that he had with Mr. Satchwell was not on the 24th, he was actually away at that time, and that it was on the 30th of March. And he accepted under cross-examination from Brendan Grehan that at this point Mr. Satchwell had actually reported his wife missing to Fermoy Garda Station. He was asked about any medical issues that he noticed with Mr. Satchwell over the years, and he said that there was nothing that stood out in terms of injuries in that or that indicated violence. There was never any mention of violence prior to the 30th of March 2017, he said. But in this encounter with Mr. Satchwell on the 30th of March, he said that Mr. Satchwell told him the violence from his wife was frequent, sometimes severe, and on one occasion she had knocked out his teeth. He mentioned she'd been buying lots of items from Littlewoods, a sum of €7,000 in debt from Littlewoods, and he'd also mentioned from other sources but was not specific on the amounts. He said in that last encounter that he had with Mr. Satchwell that he saw a very big change in him, that he appeared to be very bothered, that the Gardaí had said he needed medication, and his notes had said that he seems more upset today about his wife, tells me she had been acting strangely the last few years, and his allegation was that she had taken the money with her. He told the court it was the first time that he looked unwell, that he looked unshaven, and I have not seen him since until this day. There was a brief then issue where the witness, the doctor on the witness stand, handed a piece of paper to Mr. Grehan and indicated that he had something to say about it. The jury were asked to leave the room, and upon returning, the doctor was asked whether there was anything else that he observed about Mr. Satchwell, and he mentioned injuries, although he then said that they may not have been injuries. This was all the way back in 2002, and explaining to basically the prosecution asked him then about these particular injuries, and this is where he said that they weren't necessarily injuries, they were maybe muscular skeletal problems, and he mentions bruising, dry eye bruising, and that rubbing his eyes may be a possible cause. That's kind of the conclusion of today's evidence. The jury were told that there is now a legal issue that both sides, defence and prosecution, have to discuss. And so they're not going to be needed tomorrow, Friday, and they're back at midday on Monday. So that's the conclusion of today's evidence as best as I can give it to you. But as I said, I just want to give you, and I'm not going to go through it chapter and verse because of course you can read it, and if you've been reading it, any of the coverage, I'm sure you can see it, of the rest of the week. But today, as I said, was the fourth interview conducted with Mr. Satchwell, but on Tuesday we heard in detail about the rearrest, basically, of Mr. Satchwell. And this again was conducted by Detective Sergeant David Noonan. And this is where Mr. Satchwell first gave this account about his wife flying at him with the chisel. So he told Detective Sergeant Noonan that he was not a monster and that what happened so fast. And the worst thing of it all is once the lie started, I couldn't stop it. We heard Mr. Satchwell describing how after his wife died on top of him, and he said he was protecting himself and it all happened in a flash, that he put her body on the couch, that he sat with her for some time, then he later put her into a chest freezer, which was in the shed, and then he subsequently ended up burying her under the stairs. And he was asked to go into a lot of detail about how he did this effectively, and he also spoke about going out briefly to go to the shop to try and buy roses for his wife, who was now deceased at this point, and he ended up getting tulips from Tesco, and he tried to give her effectively a self-funeral, as he called it, in the home. He had a dress for her that he was going to put her into, and he considered that, but he decided against it. He left her in the dressing gown that she was wearing, and a number of days later, on the Sunday the 26th, he placed her into this grave that he had dug, basically, effectively under the stairs, and he had this final goodbye with her. But going backwards again to go forwards, he was asked to describe the events of that day of the 20th of March 2017, and this is where he gave this account for the first time of making a special breakfast, as he called it, for his wife. He was aware of the fact that she may have been upset about the fact that it was the 20th anniversary of her mother, actually her grandmother's death, but her grandmother raised her, and as though she were her mother, I believe she was her mother, and that she might have been upset about this. So he made her a breakfast involving mandarins, yogurts, grapes, before he said he went out to the shed to do a bit of plumbing. He doesn't know how long that took, but he heard the dogs coming down, and he believed, as was most normal mornings, he said that Tina would now be in the bathroom. So he went in, and he was startled to find her at the bottom of the stairs, scraping the plasterboard that he'd put up with a chisel, a red and black chisel. So he said he went over to his wife and he asked her what she was doing, and he said this is when she just flew at me with such force that he fell backwards. You could see him in this interview, so you can see Mr. Satchwell being interviewed by Detective Sergeant Noonan. There's another Garda in the room taking notes. And Mr. Satchwell was making stabbing motions with his hand to describe how his wife was coming at him with this chisel and trying to stab him in the head, as he said. He said that he grabbed her dressing gown that she was wearing. He doesn't know how the belt came to be in the front, he said, but it appeared as though the belt, as he was pulling her on top of him, was against her throat. One thing I didn't tell you, she was angry, he said. All I can remember was flying back. She just flew at me and I went flying back. She flew for me, went straight for me. I don't know which other way to describe it. She jumped at me, just went for me, he said. Mr. Satchwell said his attention was focused on one thing and one thing only, and that was the chisel on top of his head. He was asked, go into detail about this. She flew at you how? And he just said she was just lurching at me after destroying the plasterboard. It just happened like that, and within seconds it's over, he said. Tina was on top of me, lying on my back with my arms up like that, up in the air, holding Tina off me. I was holding the rope belt of the bathrobe. I don't know how, but the belt was here. And he was motioning to his throat as he said that. I was holding her off, fearful. I was afraid. Then, like I said, I just laid there with her in my arms. I don't know why the belt was that high. I don't know why the back of the belt was at the front. I cannot say how many times she came down towards me. I was just holding her away from me. She was just going for the head with the chisel. So he said his wife fell limp on top of him and that he just lay there for a period of time. And then he went to the shop, he bought the tulips, as I said, and he went out to light a candle. So we'd heard previously how he went to the church and, you know, his route on the Google Maps that Gardaí obtained ultimately found he did go to the church, although his narrative at that point was that he was lighting a candle for the parrot named Pearl. But he now says he wasn't lighting the candle for Pearl only. He went in to light a candle for his wife, who had just died. When he returned to the house, his wife was still on the floor, and he made a decision to cut the belt to get it out of the way so he could hold her. I sat there against a bit of wall between the French doors and the hall, and I just put her into my arms, he said. He said what happened next what had happened just didn't feel real. It's like you know it's happened, but part of you is telling you it's not reality. This is where he said, I'm not a monster. It all happened so fast. The worst thing of it all is once the lie started, I couldn't stop it. And we know, of course, the narrative is, and the state's case is, that for the next 6 years, Mr. Satchwell did numerous media interviews, which we've seen, and also spoke to Gardaí, where he gave this narrative that his wife had apparently just vanished, and spoke about issues in the relationship. Although he only told Gardaí about the violence, he didn't say that to the media. There's just certain things that isn't there, he said, of his memory, saying that on the night of his actual first arrest, that he dreamt of Tina, that Tina came to him in his dreams. He said that ultimately what he was now saying to Gardaí he felt there was a sense of relief, but he didn't know how he was going to feel tonight. He spoke about holding Tina all night long. So he held her body sitting there in the corridor of the house, in the living room of the house, which is just as you come in the house, it's like a corridor, hall / living space. And he was just lying there between the French doors, holding his wife's body. And he spoke about how he said, you're going to think, or I'm going to say the quote right, I know in your head you're thinking, you crazy bastard. But he said, at that point in time, he felt as though he was holding the 17-year-old girl that I'd met 30 years before. He said that for all these years since, he's walked around with shame inside of him and that he hates himself. I hate myself, he said. You've no idea how many times I nearly walked off the fish pier. I stayed there for the dogs. The one truth of it is, no matter what, one thing she would have expected is to look after the dogs. So going back to this occasion where, the crucial moment where he says his wife flew at him with a chisel, he said it is probably the one time I ever defended myself truly against her. And he said that he couldn't say whether her neck was broken or whether she was strangulated in the incident. And he said that having his wife's body in his arms, that he had no feeling in his back the following morning. He basically held her all night until the following day. He ultimately put her onto the couch where he sat with her for a period of time, but he said the dogs kept coming over to her and trying to lick her, so he put her into the chest freezer. I just lifted her, or should I say I just lifted her onto it. She just fell in, he said. I don't know how you rate freezers. It wasn't a large one. Tina just slipped into it. It was horrible. She just slipped in. He said that he was robotic in those days, working on automatic, and that his brain wasn't working. And he was asked about the process of moving his wife from the couch to the freezer and how he did this. And he described his wife's body as so heavy, and it was like trying to lift a 10-ton bag of coal. He placed his wife's body in the kitchen, and this is when he considered putting the dress on her, but he said, I couldn't. He had a quote-unquote self-funeral for her. He said goodbye to her there, and then he ultimately buried her under the stairs. He said the dogs keep reminding him of what had happened, and he also said, in this self-funeral, that he wanted her to know that the hand that killed her was also the hand that loved her. He also told Gardaí, I knew what was going to happen. You could say in a sick, fanatic, retarded way, I wanted to be arrested in Youghal, because where was I? Just up the road from the Garda barracks. So he's referring to his first arrest the day prior and when he was released. And he ultimately was standing at a bus stop opposite the Garda station in Youghal, and he's saying, you could say that I wanted to be arrested again. And he also spoke of considering picking up the phone and ringing the Gardaí at that point in time. He also told Detective Sergeant Noonan how he'd contemplated suicide, but he'd also contemplated over the years handing himself into Gardaí and telling them, here lads, this is the story. So he thought about that over the years. He was asked about that process of burying his wife and how he did it, and he said he didn't want to dirty her, so he wrapped her body in black plastic. I didn't chuck her down. I didn't drop her into the hole, he said. I wasn't disrespectful. I can remember folding the plastic around her, pushing the flowers down. Even up to the other day, I still talk of her. I dreamed of the nice Tina. I know people knew that side, but I never wanted the public to see that side. I never set out with the intention of harming Tina, he said. He said that he lay his wife down in a respectful manner, but he said that because one of her legs were bent, he wasn't able to lie her down fully into the grave that he dug for her. He then spoke of over the years, over a period of time, that he would sit by this grave that he had made for her, that he'd filled in with concrete, and that he would speak to his wife while sitting on the ground there next to her grave. You have no idea, and nothing I will ever say to you will ever make it right, but the amount of times I sat and talked to that piece of ground you wouldn't believe, he said. I used to open the door and I used to talk to her. For a start, it was virtually every day. Sometimes it could be hours, other times it could be a quick hello, love. He insisted to Gardaí that there was nothing planned about what happened, and he said that he was not a bad person. He said at times his wife was very angry, but he believes that he was just trying to protect himself, and that after that then it was just fear and disbelief. He spoke about the night prior as well, earlier on the 19th of March, and how his wife was upset and crying into his arms, and that his view was that she was missing her independence, that she was upset about leaving Fermoy and going to move to Youghal. The tears and the upset, I do honestly believe that it was the move to Youghal, he said. She went to sleep in my arms with tears that night, the night of the 19th. So there was a lot of evidence about this new story that Mr. Satchwell was presenting to Gardaí for the first time. And he also spoke about the 19th, that his wife had slapped him in the car on their way back from the car boot sale and knocked his glasses off, that they didn't talk in the car, but that everything was good, that they went to bed that night. He spoke again in a lot of detail about how they went to bed together, how he put baby oil on her, and that she fell asleep basically in his arms after being quite upset, and he was worried that he had spoken previously that he was worried that maybe she was going to leave him. That was a thought process that had come into his head in relation to that. He also, just I want to mention, spoke about that period of time after his wife died, after he had pressed this belt, as he described it, up against her neck, and he said that as she lay there on the ground, the two dogs, Heidi and Ruby, were just there sitting and looking. And he spoke about his wife not being a bad person, he said, and that this area under the stairs where he buried her, that it wasn't concreted underneath, that's why he put her there. He said, I was holding her and kissing her on the head, then there was no taking it back. Shame, panic, I don't know. And also just in relation to his wife, how she was after she died, he said that her face was distorted with anger. So that was the Tuesday, and Mick was there for the Wednesday for kind of the latter half of the interview with Mr. Satchwell. I wasn't there myself, so I'm not going to go into great detail because I don't have it all, but if you can read it there, and I'm just going to give you some of the highlights of it. We went into the second and the third interview with Mr. Satchwell, conducted by Detective Sergeant Noonan, and Mr. Satchwell said that he wasn't trying to bullshit the officer, and he said, I am going to prison. There will be no jury because I'm going to plead guilty. I'm telling you that now. And he also, in this interview, said, I am no expert. I am telling you from my experience the way I experienced it. 100 experts can say I am wrong, but it is the way I seen it. Everything I have said today is the way that my physical self seen it. He also said that he was sick of living behind a mask, and I am here and I am saying it as best I can. When the event was finished, it was the belt I was holding her up by. And he was asked by Detective Sergeant Noonan how close his hands were to Tina's neck, and he replied, I don't know. And he was asked if the belt around Tina's belt around Tina's neck, and he said, not to my knowledge. And the detective said, can you see how that doesn't make sense? And Mr. Satchwell said, I am not trying to bullshit you. I am going to prison regardless. There will be no jury because I'm going to plead guilty. I'm telling you that now. So that's where that quote comes from. And he said, for 36 years, I have kept a secret for Tina from the public eye, her violence. I am not going to have it dragged out in court for every Tom, Dick and Harry to talk about. I can't see how Tina died. It doesn't make sense from what you've described. So Detective Sergeant Noonan said, I can't see how Tina died. It doesn't make sense from what you've said. And Mr. Satchwell said, I explained it the best way I can. And Detective Sergeant Noonan said, show me what happened. And Mr. Satchwell said, I can't. It happened in a flash. And the officer said, show me. And Mr. Satchwell said, "I can't emotionally. It feels to me as if you are trying to push me into a situation where I say something just to please you. I don't want to go down the road of saying no comment. I would like to understand. I would like to know why my life fell apart in what seemed like 10 seconds. It happened. I defended myself. I was not taking notes. I, at a certain point, was not looking at Tina's face. I was looking at Tina's clothes. I was looking at the chisel." And again, he said, "I was operating on automatic. I am not saying that Tina stabbed me. I have already told you I prevented that. I cannot recall times. I don't know how long she lay on top of me before I moved." And he said, "What happened was a blur. It was like it was happening in a film. I wanted to make her comfortable." That's just some of the evidence that was heard on Wednesday, the other part of that interview with Mr. Satchwell. And earlier on the Monday, so the start of this week, there were a couple of other witnesses that we heard from in the case. And I suppose one of the key witnesses of the day was a Dr. Niamh McCullough. So Dr. Niamh McCullough, she's an experienced forensic archaeologist, and she was among the first who were in the house in that search, uncovered the remains of Tina Satchwell. And we heard that those remains, when they were first uncovered in this black plastic sheeting in this grave that Mr. Satchwell had dug, that investigators, that the forensic archaeologists and anthropologists at the scene saw what appeared to be a hand coming out of this, a skeletal hand coming out of this black plastic bag, and that's when they realised they had discovered the remains under the stairs of the house. And Dr. McCullough, the court heard she has a PhD in the study of homicides, specifically in a case where victims' remains have been concealed. And she was asked when Gardaí were re-examining this case in 2022 to conduct a report to hypothesise possibly where remains might be concealed. And she came to the conclusion that, based off her own research and based off research that's out there, that most victims are often, where they are concealed, are often concealed within a kilometre of their home, or more than likely in their home, in the majority of domestic homicide cases. And she hypothesised that it was more likely that Miss Satchwell was killed at her home and that her remains were there still in the home. She hypothesised two other possibilities, but all the possibilities were that Miss Satchwell was killed in her home. And she agreed with Brendan Gretton, Senior Counsel, that it was more than likely in her findings that Tina never left her home alive. She submitted that report to Anne-Marie Toomey, who then Detective Inspector, now Superintendent, and she was leading the reinvestigation, re-examining what had happened to Tina Satchwell, and they ultimately concluded she was murdered and identified Richard as a suspect. So she submitted that report, and that report, we've heard, she concluded that the remains were likely still in the home, and so she recommended an invasive search, knocking down walls, really excavating the place in order to find those remains. And we already heard from the now Superintendent Toomey that she ultimately went to a judge, sought a warrant, and executed that warrant, searching Mr. Satchwell's home in October of 2023. So that's kind of a broad summary of some of what we've heard. There were also Garda witnesses, such as Detective Garda Brian Barry, who was the first Garda there at the scene when the remains were uncovered, and he spoke about noticing the colouring of the cement, for example, that it was different, and that raised his suspicion, and ultimately how the red brick wall was knocked down, and there was a lot of detail about how that black bag was first discovered when they excavated in under the stairs. And we heard a little bit about how the post-mortem took place and how the skeletal remains were basically the remains of Tina Satchwell were face down, and that when they were turned around, that they were better preserved on the front. And we've heard the first details of that post-mortem examination, how she was identified and how there were glass shards on her scalp and around her torso area. And we heard a bit more about that on Friday. So that's kind of a summary of all of the evidence from this week. And as I said, we are back in court next Monday at midday for the fourth week of Richard Satchwell's murder trial. So thanks everybody for listening. I hope that was okay. Very hard to talk to yourself, I must say, but I hope it did all right. So thanks for listening.